Hi everyone, it's Kerry Jeffrey here from Emotional Autoimmunity, navigating the emotional side of autoimmune diseases. And today I have the absolute pleasure in speaking to the lovely Alexandra Raver of Don't Eat the Spatula. And I'll tell you a little bit about Alex before I start talking to her. So Alex first created her blog, Don't Eat the Spatula, as a way of sharing her favourite recipes and kitchen creations with her friends and family. But now her blog focuses on healing recipes following the AIP protocol and sharing her own health journey along the way. She is happiest when in her kitchen, tripping over one or more of her 3 cats, singing and dancing along to music while making a delicious meal to share with her husband. So welcome, Alex. It's so lovely to get to talk to you.
Hi, thank you for having me. And I'm actually laughing because that description is so incredibly accurate. I was tripping over 2 cats making dinner this evening, and I was just like, can you just let me make dinner? So that could not have been a more accurate description of my life.
Oh, that's gorgeous. So, Alex, can you tell us a bit about what particular health challenges you have and what has been your journey to where you are now?
Sure. So the formal diagnosis that I have is Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome, which is a chronic disease. While not categorized as an autoimmune condition, it can lead to one, and honestly, by definition, it pretty much is one. Interestingly enough, this April marks 10 years since I was diagnosed, which is kind of crazy. And it's been a very interesting journey. I was maybe 19 or 20 when I first was diagnosed, and it was a shocker. I definitely felt like I went through the many stages of grievancy, just kind of depression and acceptance and anger and all of it rolled into one, just because even back then, how uncommon that condition is. It's still not very common now, unfortunately. But even then, I had probably had the condition maybe even 10 years prior to that. I mean, for as long as I can remember, I'd had a lot of those symptoms, and just not realizing all along that it wasn't normal to feel the way I was feeling, to have chronic, fatigue or many of the other symptoms that come with PCOS. But I just accepted it because it was socially accepted. Like I just kind of didn't know any better. So when I was diagnosed, I went on medication because that's all I knew. And I did that for many years. And honestly, it made me more sick. I didn't respond well to any of the medication, and I think it pushed me over the edge. And I think I have developed other conditions. Again, still can't get a diagnosis, but then again, that's a story every person with a chronic disease knows very well, is trying to obtain the diagnosis. So I guess it was about 4 years ago, I had decided to really take a step into healing myself. And the only way that I kind of knew how at the time, that was kickstarting and joining a 5:30 a.m. boot camp that met 4 days a week, because that was a genius idea. And while it probably wasn't the best thing for me, it did kickstart a lot. And had I not done that, I would not have at all ventured to where I am now. Obviously, in time, I found out that the boot camp style was just not a good method for me. But I did find other things through it, such as yoga. I discovered yoga through that class, and also just eating healthier than what I thought I was eating healthy. And I thought I grew up eating relatively healthy because we didn't drink soda, and my mom cooked most of the meals, but really it wasn't really that healthy. And so I started trying to eat more whole foods. And then I kind of stumbled upon paleo, which, having been on diet since probably a teenager, I was like, sure, why not? Let's try it. I mean, it's cheaper. It's just real food. So I started it, and kind of through that, I eventually found AIP and was in denial for so long of actually starting it. But then when I did start it, I really did notice a lot of changes. And, like many other people, I kind of started just with the diet and then realized there were so many other components to it. And so right now I'm working on the other components. I think the diet I very much well understood, but it's, those other parts, sleep, when I was able to really focus on sleep, I started noticing more change, and the relaxation and stress mechanisms as well. Again, that's a big one I need to work on. So obviously I feel like I'm very much in the infancy of my journey. I've been AIP for a little over a year, but I still feel like I'm just starting. So, but it's definitely been an interesting journey. And again, with the health, I'm still trying to get diagnosis, but I've just decided to treat myself as though I have these diagnosed autoimmune conditions. And that seems to have been what was the best for me, instead of waiting for that kind of formal diagnosis. Though, to be honest, for frame of mind, I would eventually like to get that, but we'll see. So.
And you were saying, Alex, that getting your diagnosis sort of made sense in childhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm trying to remember when the exact moment was where I just started to notice I was different from the other kids. For me, the biggest thing as a young child was I just put on an extreme amount of weight for really no reason. And I was an active kid. I did soccer, I did gymnastics, I was very involved in activities. I never was really lazy. We didn't watch TV growing up. Again, we didn't really eat anything out of the ordinary. And my sister, she ate the same food and she looks completely different than I did. And so there was a lot of frustration, a lot of kind of unanswered questions, like constantly through my childhood and teenage years, especially. Like, I don't understand. I eat just like everybody else and I look so different. I'm 50 to 100 pounds heavier than some of these other kids. I've got unwanted hair in places, of discolored skin, all these different symptoms. And I just was tired and everything hurt. And I just constantly was like, I don't understand why. And when I did get that diagnosis, one of the biggest things that I struggled with was, why me? Like, what did I do to deserve this? Because I felt like I had followed, everything right, and I tried so hard. And even throughout, after that diagnosis, and kind of trying different things, and everything just failing, like in my mind, failing the medication, the diets that were recommended through the doctors, all of that, and just people constantly saying, well, you're just not trying hard enough. And then me wanting to scream, like, you have no idea how hard I am trying. And so coming from like not having any answers to, having an answer, but really not, it's just been kind of an internal struggle for a good bit of my life. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I can absolutely relate to that, because I think that's when my celiac and Hashimoto's probably first manifested when I was about 9 years old. I just suddenly, it seemed almost overnight, went from a normal girl to a very overweight girl.
Yep.
Despite being out all day roller skating and playing with my friends and being fairly active. And there was no explanation. So, yeah, there's very much the fingers are pointed back at you and saying, oh, well, you eat too much, you're lazy, you're not disciplined enough. And so, like, I went through most of my life up until probably the last 5 years, when I just decided I wasn't going to diet anymore, and I was just going to, get into intuitive eating and be at peace with wherever my body wanted to be. And yeah, there is that awful feeling that people look at you and think, you're slack, you're slow, you're lazy, you're a glutton, all of those different sorts of things. And so I have to wonder myself, really, how much of obesity is due to undiagnosed autoimmune diseases that people just don't know they have.
Oh, absolutely. And, something, when I was diagnosed with the PCOS, in that instance, it was really interesting. And I just had this conversation with my mom this weekend, where I was expressing, just kind of the question of why, like, why me? I don't understand this. My mom was ecstatic, like, finally, because she had seen me struggling for so long. And so in her mind, she was excited that I had gotten an answer. And, you know, obviously now as an adult, I get that now, but then I was so young. But also in that moment, she realized, wait a minute, I have this condition. This has been undiagnosed for me. And she, you know, it did develop further for her. She has RA, which I think a lot of that came from being undiagnosed with the PCOS and the autoimmune condition. That really, it further did actually develop into an AI disease. And so it's kind of, it hit the family, you know, they're at different stages. So it was just very interesting. So she, you know, once she had to deal with me. And then when I moved on, I think she ended up dealing with her own kind of grievance through it as well. And she's only just kind of getting through it, you know, kind of watching how I've been able to kind of come to acceptance, I think, with it. At times, I mean, it's frustrating, but just like you were saying, you know, kind of coming to terms with how you look and realizing that, wow, people still look at you and judge, and I'm sure they do. But at the same time, I know in my mind that in some ways I'm a lot healthier than a lot of them in what I'm doing for myself in the long term. And so, you know, I may look kind of the same to what I did 4 or 5 years ago, but I feel so different, just emotionally, but physically, you know, there's just so many things that I'm not feeling that I felt those few years ago, even though maybe on the outside I look pretty much the same. So.
And I think a lot of people don't, you know, I was just visiting my naturopath this morning and we were having this discussion that a lot of healthcare professionals don't really understand the psychological, emotional side of having a chronic disease. Yes. They really don't get it. So a lot of people are told, oh, that's not part of your condition. If you're fit, you know, you're depressed, we'll put you on medication, or you're anxious, we'll put you on medication, or you're a bit foggy or a bit slow or unmotivated, we'll put you on medication. They don't understand that that's actually a symptom of the issue and the disease that's going on.
Yeah, in fact, again, in this conversation we had this weekend, my mom had said, I wish that there was grief counseling provided when you do receive a diagnosis like that, because you need it. It is like a part of you is, you know, kind of in a way dying. Like I'm going to live with this condition the rest of my life. There is no cure for autoimmune conditions, and there's no cure for PCOS, which is why I relate it very much to an autoimmune condition. I will struggle with this forever. So to be told at the age of 20, you're going to have to make permanent life changes and, you know, not be normal. Of course, I've redefined normal, but, you know, be normal for the rest of your life. And there does need to be a grievance period, and there does need to be someone there to talk to. And if not the doctor, there should be a recommendation from the doctor of who to talk to. And she did ask for that when she received her RA diagnosis. And they were like, well, here's some medication. And that was it. And I can imagine why a lot of people struggle with that as well.
And I found because, you know, when you get autoimmune disease or any sort of chronic disease, it's like you suddenly see it everywhere. Like it's all these people come out of the closet. And when you have it yourself, you've got a lot more understanding. And so a lot of the clients that I see have thyroid issues, rheumatoid arthritis, those sort of things. And so it's really, as a therapist, it's given me a whole new understanding about what's going on with them and how big a role the illness plays in everything that's going on in their life and how it affects every aspect of their life. So I think it's sort of exciting times in a way, because there's so much information now coming out. And I think, you know, with the role of nutrition in wellness and all of those different sorts of things, it sort of feels like we're on the start of a whole new era of talking about and treating autoimmune disease. So it's still way in its infancy, but do you feel it's changed?
It's interesting. I definitely, some days I do and sometimes I don't. And I think some of it is I do feel a little bit in my bubble. because I have really surrounded myself with a community of individuals who see that and want that change. But at the same time, interestingly enough, so PCOS is actually something a lot of times where you can very much see visual cues of the condition, just because of where the weight sits on an individual, unwanted hair, thinning of hair. And so just like you were saying, when I was first diagnosed, I started seeing friends or perfect strangers and looking at them and thinking, that person has this condition. I wonder if they even know. And so that kind of evolution it's continued to grow with me. I've been able to kind of keep it to myself. But, of late, I've seen some people close to me who I know have conditions, AI conditions, and it's really hard to not want to be like, you're doing it wrong, without really saying, they're going to the sources where you first went when you were diagnosed. They're going to the doctor, they're going to the nutritionist, and that's great. They're making strides in their health, so I don't want to deter them, but at the same time, I'm thinking, I know that dairy is not good for you. Heck, dairy is not good for anybody, really. You're just, it just like simple things like that. And so, if you had spoken to me last week, I might have felt different. But after this week, I've had a lot of kind of real moments where, while my close network of friends and family who do know what's going on with me, kind of get it. But at the same time, there's a lot to go, and a lot of education. And so, it's just, I kind of need to step out of my bubble a few more times here and there to kind of get a reality check, I think. So.
And one of the biggest things that I personally find with what I have is that, I look really healthy on the outside. And, most days I am, I can do everything that I want to do. But, now and then my disease likes to remind me that it's there and it'll jump up and we have symptoms. And it can bring up a lot of all different sorts of emotional challenges. So at 19, when you got that diagnosis, that must have been a huge thing, as you said, to think, I've got this for the rest of my life. Do you feel now you've learned the lessons of adapting, or do you feel there was a lot of things that you had to come to terms with?
There was a lot that I had to come to terms with. The timing of it all was also not exactly the most ideal. In truth, what had happened is I had ended up, I was studying abroad at the time, and it was spring break, and I was touring Europe with friends, and I ended up in the hospital in France with a severely infected cyst. And I ended up having to fly home for recovery. And in that time was when I met with this new doctor who basically looked at me and looked at everything that was going on. And she's like, you have PCOS. And I was like, okay. And 2 days later, I got back on a plane and had to finish out the next 2 months of my semester. So there wasn't even anything that happened right away. So the time to process, finishing out a semester. It was, of course, when is there ever good timing, but it was pretty bad timing. And so coming back, I then, kind of went to the doctor and really kind of full steam ahead, really, okay, so what do I do now? But at the same time, I was only just coming into my junior year of college. And, that's, starting of the drinking age and going to parties and wanting to be involved. And there's pizza events and this and that. And, I didn't want to feel different. I wanted to have a normal college experience. And so, I tried some things. I would try to go to the gym and try to be like everyone else. But, at times I struggled with the physicality of it, that, I kind of the invisible parts of the illness with the fatigue and the aches and pains that weren't because I was lazy. It was because I just couldn't. I did not have the energy. My body was not processing things right. It wasn't producing things right. So I was just so off balanced. And then I really did hit a pretty bad wall of depression at that time, and, you know, had to start counseling. And I think it was, you know, a combination of the diagnosis, a combination of wanting to feel normal, but at the same time I was not. And it hit hard. I mean, it really did. Those last few years, my grades started to drop. I ended up flunking out of 2 classes. I mean, it was pretty bad. And I don't know exactly what was the turning point in that moment to at least get me through. It was probably meeting my husband, actually. You know, someone who was like loving me, started to help me kind of love myself again. And I needed to do that. And I still had a lot to go, but it definitely kind of helped push me through college and get through all of that. And then I think it was like a change of scene. You know, I ended up getting a job a couple hours away, moving away from the area and being able to start again, and realizing that adulthood's just very different than the kind of judgmental college and high school years. And so I started to kind of establish who I wanted people to see me as, rather than letting them define that. And so, you know, I think that was kind of major, and kind of growing up fast, but having to do it, and I needed to do it. So, but I think the kind of acceptance only really came just a few years ago, and with kind of how I looked and how I felt. And a lot of that had to do with starting even just paleo, and seeing the little bit of change that I got from that. And just like, I don't know, I just really just decided I was going to take the time on me and focus on myself and not pleasing anyone else. And as soon as I like kind of flipped that switch, I really saw a change. And, you know, even just now, I kind of have moments where I really just don't care what other people think. And this is me, and this is who I am. And, you know, I've worked really hard to get to this place. And so I'm not going to let others push me down or kind of sit there and judge me. And I know they are, but I kind of just, I don't know, I guess it's part of growing up too, at the same time as well. But it's, I mean, like I said, of the 10 years since the diagnosis, it's only really been the last 3 or 4 that I've been able to kind of get to that point. So.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? Because you get given a diagnosis, and then you're left on your own to deal with it in this sort of uncharted territory. And you're told, oh, well, that's it. You've got this for life. You know, this might happen, this might happen, this might happen. You might have this challenge, and you're sitting back going, okay, how do I deal with this? Where's the support systems? Where's the structures? And there's nothing apart from what you find yourself.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, I find this among many other AI conditions, and particularly with PCOS, is the lack of resources out there, and the fact that it's so under-researched, as far as kind of where does it originate from. I mean, they still don't even know how PCOS comes from. They say it could be genetic, it could be environmental, it could be a combination of both. You know, there's still discrepancies on how to treat it, and some treatments work for some people. Sometimes the medications like that I took, they worked really well for other people. They had reverse effect on me. And it's also such a broad diagnosis. I call it, I was using this reference earlier this week. I call it the fibromyalgia of non-AI diseases, because it's basically like, oh, well, you have all these symptoms, we're just going to throw this on you. But really, you don't even have to have all the symptoms to have the diagnosis. And so it's such a broad category of individuals that they just don't know how to treat it. And so the lack of, like, half the time, especially in the beginning when I would meet a new doctor, I would actually have to explain what it was. They didn't even know what the condition was. And so that's been difficult too. You know, other kind of conditions are much more known, much more studied. The truth is, though, 1 in 10 women have PCOS in the United States. That's a lot of people. And that's, you know, it could be even higher considering so many people go undiagnosed. So it's just, I think that's been the most difficult part, is just the lack of, there's really not a strong foundation within the community to kind of go to find information. And for the longest time, I was really the only person that I ever knew that had it, formally had been diagnosed with it, besides my mom. And so there was no community for me to reach out to. And so that was really difficult. And only kind of with the kind of larger communities of kind of Facebook and all of that. But even that was still developing 10 years ago, when I was diagnosed. I was like, when Facebook came out, that was just for college kids, and it was just so different. So there wasn't those social media means to connect with people. That's only happened in maybe the last 5 years or so. So it took, reaching out outside of my area to even find that community. So.
And it can come with some, really big, scary things. I know a member of my family was diagnosed with PCOS, PCOS. Gosh, I think it was probably about 8 years ago. And at the time, she was like, not as young as you, but she was in her 20s. And the doctor was sort of saying, you'll probably never be able to have children. You're going to have ongoing health conditions. You're going to have difficulty losing weight. And it was just, she was devastated, because it was like this sudden, judgment upon you, this part of your life is over, and you will never have this, and you will never have that. And then there was nowhere to go.
No, it's so true. And that's the thing. They really do threaten you with that. I mean, that's the thing, at 19, I was told it's going to be very difficult for you to have children. If you do, you are at a very high risk for miscarriage. You will always have difficulty losing weight. You can try this and you can try that, but each individual person is so different in how they have developed the PCOS and what their PCOS looks like. And so I was just like, what? How do I even, I mean, yes, it was good to get an answer, but at the same time, I didn't really get an answer. I got more questions. And so it was really, really hard, and just continued, like, that kept being told to me over and over again. And kind of more of a kind of, talking about this emotional side and mentality of it, a lot of times PCOS, it is proven, if undiagnosed, can lead to diabetes. And so they're constantly monitoring you and checking your blood sugar. And at the time when I was diagnosed, I was in the pre-diabetic range, which was also kind of a shocker. And, I think that moment was more real than anything when I had been told about that. And so that came like a whole new set of questions, and like, what do I do? I don't understand this. What are you talking about? I feel like I do everything right. I'm eating this, and I'm moving, and I'm living a normal life. I keep using that word, but so it was really difficult. And then even the medications they put you on are very similar to what diabetics are on. And so a lot of times when I would walk into a new doctor's office and I would have my list of medications or whatever, they would immediately look at me, see that list, and assume I have diabetes, which I don't. And I would get frustrated because there's just this, again, visual cue. People look at you and assume one thing. And, I felt like in my mind to be considered, that would be considered defeat, that I had given up on trying to kind of treat my PCOS. And so it would always be kind of like a sticking point for me. And even now, I still get a little like riled up, I think, sometimes when I hear that, because, I've worked so hard, and in truth, my numbers are completely normal. My A1C numbers are very normal. And, I've, within I think a year or two, I had pulled out of the pre-diabetes range and have never jumped back into it. And so, but it just those kind of assumptions, those visual cues are just what people think. And, PCOS comes with insulin resistance. So you do have to be very careful about a lot of the same cues that diabetics do, but it's just very different. So, I mean, it's just not just the blood sugar and overweight. It's so many other things. It's the hormone imbalance. It's, just everything. So, and again, there's just so little known about it, that you kind of have to just figure it out. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do, is figure it out. So, yeah.
And obviously you've been dealing with doctors for a long time, Alex. I mean, knowing what you know now, if you were a young woman just starting out with that diagnosis again, do you think you'd do anything differently when it came to your relationships with doctors?
Oh, definitely. I think what I have learned so much in the last few years is, first of all, doctors aren't always right. In that they, they are taught they're taught what they're taught in medical school, and that's, great. And, I'm not just crediting any of that, but there's just so much more beyond that. And so I would have questioned a lot more within the diagnosis. I would have pushed for more testing. Honestly, I would have definitely questioned the medication. The immediate reaction I had gotten from going on the one medication was so abrupt. And I mean, I actually took myself off of the medications, and with just how horrible I had felt. And I had kind of just needed to take a break because they just weren't listening to me when I was saying it wasn't feeling well. They, typical, well, let me just give you this for this symptom. And even like then I had started to kind of question it, but, now I know that's not always the answer. And thank goodness for my condition, I don't necessarily need that medication, the medical intervention. I know some people do, and I don't want to, discredit that at all, because I know there is a place in the autoimmune community for medication, but in my condition, I don't think it's necessary, not for where I am and how my condition has developed. For those maybe further on who've maybe pushed into the pre-diabetic or diabetic, then it's different. But especially back then when I had been diagnosed, there was really no reason for me to be on medication at that point at all. And again, I think it just accelerated a lot of things and made it worse, and caused where I am, or where I was a few years ago. So.
Yeah. And having autoimmune disease or any sort of chronic disease adds so many challenges to the way we feel and relate to our bodies. And I know a lot of people say that they feel like their bodies have betrayed them or let them down. So, Alex, did you find that having your disease and your diagnosis, did it change the way you see your body and your relationship with it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was probably the biggest part for me, because my disease is very physical in appearance, that I had seen at first in the diagnosis. And so I was very, very frustrated. I was frustrated that I was 20 years old and dealing with facial hair that I shouldn't have as a female, and, discoloration under skin and skin tags, and this kind of balloon weight around my midsection. I felt so unfair. Like that was, as a, kind of 19, 20-year-old, I was like, this is just so unfair. Why has my body done this to me? What did I do to deserve this? And I felt very betrayed by it all. And it just left so confused, because I just didn't get it. And I thought I was kind of doing the right things again by myself, and feeding, again, what I thought was the right stuff for myself. And so especially after I was first diagnosed, I kind of was like, well, what many people do when you feel defeated. I was like, well, if I'm already this way, then I'm just going to keep, I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm just going to eat whatever I want to eat, and I'm going to do what all the other kids are doing. And I rebelled against it, because I just was like, well, it is what it is, and everything I've tried has not made it better. And so my body's just going to do what it wants to do. And so I kind of gave up on myself for a while. And I did kind of let my body win. And again, through the evolution of it, obviously kind of came to terms. And the interesting thing is, there are times when I think about this visual cue where a lot of people who have kind of conditions with their bodies where they look in the mirror and they see one thing. And I always kind of looked at myself, and I never saw myself as big as what other people did. Like, I actually never, even through a lot of it, I would look at myself and I was like, yeah, I'm bigger. But I never really looked at my body and hated it that much in the mirror, which was so interesting, being very physical for me. And even to this day, like, I look at myself and I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't look like other people, but I never really like looked in that mirror and said I hated my body. It was more of just other things that kind of, I just felt let down by it. And I still struggle with it for sure. There are things that I hate. I mean, I'll admit it, I have to shave my face every single day, and it sucks. And I'm going to have to do that forever. And it's one of the conditions that I'm going to struggle with. And it's a very, very personal, physical thing that people can see. And it stinks. But at the same time, if I'm able to treat other things, and I can feel better, and, it's like small in the grand scheme of things, if I'm able to be more active and, got to the point where just a year ago I had run like 7 or 8 5Ks, and I'd done a 10K, and, I'd done a lot of things that I never thought I could do. And if this is the trade-off, then, so be it, so, but it's, I still have days where I do sometimes feel betrayed by my body. But, they're less and less now. So that's good.
And it's that constant process of acceptance, isn't it? I mean, I find that myself, when I'm having, like this morning, I was having some symptoms that have been brought on by various different stresses in my life that I haven't had for a good 9 months. And they're scary symptoms. And it's just that process that I find I've just got to say, okay, well, this is how it is right now. There's nothing you can do about it. You just got to keep doing what you're doing, and you are going to feel better. It's part of the condition. That's the way it is, because I find that anytime I go into, I hate this, or I wish I didn't have this, or why did this have to happen to me, it's just a world of pain, isn't it? Because it just makes everything worse. You have what you have, and you've just got to try and make the best. And like you say, those little things that you've got to put up with, or you've got to do, they're just part of it. And you've got to focus on the bigger picture.
Exactly. And kind of focus on the good days rather than the bad days. And I mean, and the one thing, I would say probably over the last several months of being able to kind of really focus on stress management, realizing that feeling was actually just, it was making it worse. Like, I do find, just like you, when I start bringing those stressors back in, I notice some symptoms coming back that, I have been able to control. And so I do have to be like, okay, you just like calm down. And so then, it's learning to kind of let go of the smaller things to kind of be able to approach the big things.
And that's a thing that a lot of people don't understand, is that stress in and of itself is enough to throw you back into a flare or to exacerbate your symptoms, because it just affects everything. So do you do anything specific, Alex, to just really take that time to relax and eliminate stress?
Yeah, I have a few things that I like to do. Walking, when it's really nice. In fact, the other day I came home, I was gone for the weekend, and I came home and I was just in a mood, and I just, like, everything was stressing me out. And I just was like, you know what? I have to put my sneakers on. I need to go for a walk. And I left everything at home, and I walked, and I found a bench, and I just kind of sat, and I just like let everything go, kind of just let it release. But when that's not possible, other things for me, sometimes a good bath. Like, in fact, I'm planning a bath after this call because it's been a little bit of a stressful day for me. But my favorite thing has always been to basically crank up my favorite music and just sing my heart out. Which somebody did Eileen had done a podcast about, someone had, I can't remember who it was, but talked about singing and singing really loud and how beneficial that actually is for stress. And I've been doing that forever. So that is probably my favorite thing, is just to turn up something and sing as loud as I can and just really get into the music. And that just always brings me back down.
No, I'm right with you on that. I discovered this app called Smule, where you can sing, and so I do that at least 3 times a week. I just lock myself in the bedroom and I just sing my heart out, and it's really, really good stress relief. So that's fantastic. Alex, one of the most difficult and frustrating things about having ongoing chronic disease is trying to get your partner or your friends or family to understand what you're going through or any limitations that you might have. So has your diagnosis and disease, has it changed your relationships? And were there any relationships that you had to let go of so that you could get on with your life and be happier?
Yeah, I definitely think it has changed relationships. I've noticed right when I really decided to kind of focus on myself, I had to let go of all the negativity, obviously. I know it's a very crunchy thing to say, but I had to kind of get away from those friends who were just constantly pessimistic. And, they just wanted to kind of sit around and complain about life. And I remember distinctly when I had gotten my first job, I had moved down to the big city, DC, and I wanted to kind of fit in with all the kind of young generation kids, and they would go out to drink and different things like that, which is just really not even what I like to do anyway. And they just constantly were kind of complaining about work or complaining about other people. And, at the time I really wanted to fit in. And then I just realized, I'm like, but this isn't doing me any good. I'm feeling like I did when I was younger, just wanting to be a part of it all. And that's, not doing what I enjoy. And so I started to gravitate more towards people who were sharing the same interest as myself. And I think that was kind of like even the first little change as an adult. But then when I kind of started to really get more active and involved in working out or kind of diet and just changing what I was eating, I had some people that kind of were a little judgy about it. And I just kind of was like, okay, well, we'll stay connected. But, and even just recently I've had some people that I don't really know what happened, but, we've just decided to kind of part ways for a little while. And you definitely realize very quickly who those good friends are, the ones that really want to support you. And while they may not understand what you're going through, or even understand why you're doing what you're doing, they're still supportive through it. So that has been very interesting. And, family-wise, I think, with my mom having received that diagnosis, she was always supportive, but she didn't always know what to do because, again, we just had no idea. And she was constantly being supportive, and she still is, of just encouraging me to do things for myself. And she was the one who pushed me to go see a naturopath. And, obviously that has been a really good thing for me. But at the same time, I always wanted her to do more for herself too, and kind of understand the kind of good that I was coming from all of this, that I started to feel better, that I, was really handling my condition a little bit more. And I think that was actually a little difficult and put a little bit of strain on the relationship for a little. But then after a while, she kind of, I couldn't push her, but she did eventually kind of start to make her own changes, kind of through my example. And so that's what I've learned more than anything, because it is really hard. I do want to help people, but, you can't help them unless they want it. That's one thing I've learned a lot. And sometimes the best way to teach is actually just continuing doing what you're doing and allowing them to see your success through it. So, My parents, they went on their first Whole30 in August, and they've not stopped really. And that was all on their own. News to me that they did it. And they're both doing so well on it. And even my husband, he does not eat paleo. He does kind of his own thing, but in time I have taught him that, every meal has to have a protein and a vegetable and a starch, and, like, this is what it looks like. And, and I think he's, again, watched me as I've moved into this direction of my, health, and kind of, seeing, maybe I need to do a little bit of this or work on a little bit of that. And so it's encouraging to see that. And so, again, the best thing I've learned is to just kind of do my own thing, and the people will naturally follow or not follow, and then kind of just go with it.
Yes, and I've been enjoying your recipes. I've been enjoying the hashtag, what is AIP pregnancy, that you've been putting around. So
yes.
Has anything changed for you being pregnant? I mean, how are you feeling with it all?
Yeah, so it's exciting. It was kind of a shocker, again, because being told over and over and over again that pregnancy was just not going to be an option, or if it was, it would be extremely difficult for you. And even if you did get pregnant, this kind of miscarriage idea. So I will say a lot of that definitely worried me, which probably wasn't the best thing, and probably why I didn't feel the greatest in the beginning, because I did have this constant fear that something was going to happen, that I was going to miscarry, because I had just been told over and over again. Obviously, I was in a lot better health through this pregnancy than I have ever been in my adult life. And so, I probably didn't need to worry as much, but I did. And so that constant stress. But, I have to say it's been a very uneventful pregnancy, which is probably the best way to describe it, which is good. I struggled, interestingly enough, with just a lack of appetite, which is such a weird thing. And I think it kind of goes back to, when I was kind of diagnosed and going through a lot of this and trying diets and figuring out what to eat, my go-to was just not to eat, because I always thought less food. And some of that has creeped back in a little bit because of that fear of gaining weight, and the fear of, whatever I'm eating, is it right? Is it, or even if eating it, like, I don't really, I would have to force feed myself vegetables like a child sometimes, knowing that it was the best thing for me. But at the same time, I just didn't want him. So it's gotten a lot better.
I'm like that with liver.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, don't even get me started with anything awful related. I'm such a child, and I'm so jealous because my husband loves offal, which drives me crazy. It's wasted on him. But he just, like, give him the heart, give him the liver, and he will eat it all. Meanwhile, like, I have to, like, hide it in my, like, it's ridiculous. So, so yeah, that's been super fun. But no, it's been really interesting. It's been a learning experience. I did have a few reintroductions before going into the pregnancy, which definitely helped. I think to give me a few more options, particularly with starch, which is so interesting. I've realized I needed a lot more starch, which goes against every principle that any PCOS doctor will tell you. And also upping protein, which again goes against pretty much diabetic standards. So, sometimes I do it to kind of break through that mentality that I have been told for the last 10 years. And so it's been very interesting. I think I've had to do a lot more, again, on my own, of deciding what was best for me. And, I was kind of limited with my choices of who I could go with as a midwife for the pregnancy. And so kind of teaching them, like, they're like, well, if you feel sick, you can do rice crackers and this. And I'm like, well, actually, I don't eat any of that stuff. So this is what I've been doing. And, like, when I was talking to my midwife at my last meeting with her, I had said that I was struggling with food just eating enough food. Again, just still struggling with it. But I was like, but don't you worry. When I am eating, I'm eating just fine. And so I decided to tell her what I'd had for breakfast that morning, which I think was like some asparagus and salmon and like some sweet potato or something. And she just was like, yeah, you're fine. And so like, I'm probably eating better than she is, to be honest. So I definitely feel like I've had to advocate in some ways for myself through it all. But, you know, obviously it's helped having kind of gone through the AIP protocol for the last year, and being paleo for the last few years. And so I constantly say when I talk to people that had I gotten pregnant many, many years ago, the whole thing would just look so different. How I view it and how I would approach everything, not just the food, but just many other things, decisions of testing and, you know, going to visit and what the visits look like and what the discussion looks like. And so, I mean, really, this whole lifestyle, it's really changed my lifestyle. And I've tried to use that as a term when I explain it to people, is really, it is a lifestyle change. It is not a diet change. It's everything. It's how you approach almost every decision, really that's how much it's impacted me.
And I can relate to so much to what you're saying. It's my first official diagnosed autoimmune disease was antiphospholipid syndrome. And I discovered I had that when I'd had my second miscarriage, when I was trying to conceive my second child. And what that did was it meant it formed a lot of blood clots in the placenta, which starved off the baby, and the baby died. So I was also 42 when my youngest son was born. So, you know, the doctors go into this culture of fear. So I was seeing like a professor of obstetrics, a professor of hematology. I was having blood tests every week, like multiple blood tests with about 10 vials. And at each session, they would sort of say, they draw me a little timeline and say, the baby could die at this time, this time, this time, you know, and they have no impact on the stress that they're putting somebody through. And, you know, I think anybody who's got a chronic condition that's pregnant, my advice would be just ignore all of that, you know, take somebody, just say, I don't want to hear that stuff. I just want to focus on where I am now, what's going on, so I can be relaxed and I can do as much help for me as possible. And I think, you know, doctors, when you've got a chronic disease, go into like hyperdrive. It's like they want to tell you every worst case scenario in some weird, you know, attempt to prepare you, when all they do is just lay on all this stress. So yeah, no, and
difficult. Again, the knowledge of the PCOS still being kind of there wasn't a whole lot surrounding the condition, but again, that physical appearance hit, and I got very stressed about it, because I remember it was probably like my third appointment. I had, so they have this kind of web-based system, and so you can kind of see the report of each visit. And so the third time I was looking at it, and on the paperwork, it marked that I was a high-risk pregnancy and that I was morbidly obese. And immediately, like, flares setting off in my head. I just kind of like, first of all, it was not told to me that both of those were marked. They not discussed any of that with me. I came in saying, you know, the miscarriage possibility because of the PCOS, but no one actually talked to me about it. So I had the opposite. Like, they didn't want to say anything to me. They just wanted to kind of be you know, roundabout about it. And so when I had seen that, I immediately messaged my midwife and asked her, and I, you know, said, this is kind of news to me. You know, I understand with the PCOS, you know, that could, you put me at the high risk, and I understand that I'm not the ideal body weight, but, you know, what you don't understand is what I have been doing for the last several years. What you don't understand is I am in a better place than I ever have been. My blood work, you know, the blood work that you pulled looks normal. My blood sugar looks normal. Like, to pass that judgment simply on a number on a scale, I was furious, like to the point where I was considering changing offices. I mean, I just, to just broadly put that out there without even discussing it with me or knowing what was going on. And she was, thank goodness, it worked out okay. She understood, she's, explained that a lot of it is because of insurance and having to market. And she even admitted she hates that there's basically either a normal pregnancy or a high risk pregnancy, and there's nothing in the middle because it's just not realistic. And she admitted that, there needed to be more sensitivity around kind of having this discussion with patients. And so, this was all through email. And then, when we met in person, we talked a little bit more about it, but it was a little frustrating. And I made it clear that I actually do want to see, I'm of the mind that I actually want to know all the scenarios, because I need to be mentally prepared for them. And I just don't like for things to kind of come out of left field. And so, we had done the second, or like the formal growth scan, and the baby was actually measuring very small, kind of with outside of the range. And so they were like, we want to send you to the hospital to do like a formal scan and then meet with the special kind of prenatal doctor. And so then they had decided, in that they wanted to do weekly monitoring, which, I was only like 24 weeks along. That's not very common for that early in your pregnancy. Really, I was still in my second trimester. And so I did question, like, is this, really necessary? Is this really a concern? I understand there's concern for kind of growth restrictions, but, genetically, I was very small, like kind of talking, like I wanted to really talk through it, like, and with all this monitoring, what happens, like what, and so I just really wanted to have a conversation. And thank goodness I have now learned that I have the right to have that conversation. I have the right to advocate for these procedures and understand it. In the end, I decided to go with the monitoring with, some conditions, like, when we do this one, if it's gotten better, we may cut down and just this and that. And so I do want to have an open discussion. And I've learned that that's so important when dealing with the medical industry, and I say industry, but the medical field. And so this has kind of been my first opportunity, because I had just started, prior to finding out that I was pregnant, to kind of really strongly seek out these formal AI diagnosis, and not having that go very well, and like leaving a doctor's office in tears because they refused to do the testing that needed to actually be done and listen to me. And so I was not going to have that happen through the pregnancy. And so, I think it's definitely giving me more confidence that post-pregnancy to kind of get back into that and kind of really start advocating for myself more in that situation. So,
I think definitely from my experience, what I found is I've got to do what feels right to me, and I've got to do what is reassuring to me, and I've got to do what gives me the information that I need. So for me to feel comfortable with it, it's got to feel like I'm actually driving the process, not being pushed into things just because somebody wants me to do it.
Exactly. And that's something that now, because there's a lot of decisions coming up, particularly with labor, and how I want that to go down, and, what is truly required, what really does need to happen, what really doesn't need to happen. And, I've, since now, again, learning through this pregnancy and my own journey, I'm not just going to do it because the doctor says it's so. Like, I want to know the real reason behind it. And I want to know, well, has that actually been proven? And, doing unnecessary items, and, because I think there is a lot of unnecessary testing that is being done. Yes, some of it is very good and very important, and I don't disagree with that, but I do think that there's a lot of extra testing that's done. And I am starting to question it. And and realizing that I have the ability to do so has definitely been probably the biggest revelation for me as well. It's just, you know, I don't have to go with their word all the time. So.
No. And what advice, Alex, would you give the partner or family of someone who's been newly diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome?
I think that's a really good question. I would say the best advice would be to try and educate yourself as well, because that person, having been newly diagnosed with it, I would say almost 99% of the time they had never even heard of the condition. And so there's a lot of learning. And so the best thing you can do is just kind of learn with them, and just try to understand what they're going through, though you probably won't ever be able to, and really allow them that time to grieve, because they are going to need it, and kind of just take that at face value. Like, realize they're going to have those bad days, especially because it is unfortunate. There's just not a whole lot of support for them. And so I just think it's really important to, you know, as much as, like, I think in the beginning, I don't even know if I would have appreciated too much coddling, because I think it's so internal, that feeling that you're going through, because you just, in many ways, you're looking at that other individual and you're like, you will never understand what I'm going through unless they do have the same diagnosis as you. And so while it's helpful at times to be supportive, I think the supporting doesn't always have to be a constant. It can be often just letting that person have those moments, and just allow them to grieve, really is I think in the beginning the best way to support them.
I mean, looking back now, do you think that 19-year-old you would have imagined where you would be right now?
Oh my gosh, not at all. Not at all. I think that 19-year-old was so lost, just incredibly lost and confused. At the same time, I had gotten a pretty big answer and I didn't realize it, and it took a while. And so I think I was just a little too young to really understand. And that's why I say, you know, with my mom, her being so excited that I had an answer as to why all of this was going on, and why I had all these symptoms, and there was actually a name to put to it. I was like, just in pure shock by it all. And so to see the acceptance that I've come to at this point, and realizing that, you know, I am the advocate for myself, and I am the person that is the best person to educate myself on how to handle this, and realizing that it was me who made the change, and it was me who was able to make the healing happen on my own, a lot of it, to be honest. And I think that probably would have actually scared the 19-year-old if I would tell them that too, though, because it wasn't an easy journey to get to where I've been. And I'll admit it. It was very difficult. And again, I still have a long way to go. But yeah, it's been a very, very twisty, turny, interesting journey.
For sure. And what's the one thing, Alex, that you've done for yourself and your health that's made the biggest impact on you?
The biggest impact was just making it okay to focus on me. When I made that, like, firm decision, and it was like a decision with myself, that it was okay to take care of myself, that it was okay to kind of alienate some friends for a while, because I didn't have the energy to do all that activity, and I didn't have the energy to support my friends at the time. And, you know, I realized if they were those true friends and those true relationships, in the end, they would still be there when I needed them. But at that time, I needed to just be very internal on how I was focusing. And so when I made that kind of commitment, I really stuck with it. And so I think that was the biggest turning point for me.
And that's a huge one, and that's one that I think everybody really needs to get, that, you know, your health and your happiness has got to be the most important thing to you, and that's got to be your priority, because everything else is going to spring from that. If you're not looking after you, then you're not going to have the energy to look after anybody else. So if that's your priority and you have those boundaries and you can be assertive and you deal with things always from that perspective that this has got to be right for me, then everything in your life is going to get better.
Oh yeah, and I always thought it was kind of techie when people would say, you know, you have to love yourself before you can love others, but that statement could not be more true. And as, you know, sappy as it is just on so many levels, it's so true. And when I was able to even just start to allow myself to love myself and accept my body and accept my condition and accept, you know, what was going on, and, you know, having those moments even where I knew some things were just never going to change, and that was just how it was going to be. And, you know, I think it was just a few months ago, I was thinking, if it was not for my condition and what has happened to me, I would not have met the amazing people that I have met, you know, and my life and my career and everything would not have gone in the direction. And I know I'm sure you can 100% relate with that. You know, I would never have gotten to where I am had I not been diagnosed. I mean, it affected every aspect of my life was affected because of that single diagnosis 10 years ago. And because of that, I'm eternally grateful for it. I couldn't be more happier that I have gone through this journey, because I can't imagine what my life would have been, you know, without it.
And it's fantastic, you know, that there's people like you, that, because this is going to help. Everything you're saying is going to help somebody who's been sitting there given what feels like a life sentence, to see that they can still have a happy, healthy, love-filled, productive, wonderful life. And it doesn't end with diagnosis, and it doesn't mean that, you know, you're doomed and all of that sort of stuff. And I think, you know, doctors, in their quest to try and help prepare people for the worst possible outcome, often scare them silly to the point where people think this is like a death sentence.
Yeah.
And this is the end of my life, when your life is certainly going to be different, but that doesn't mean it can't be wonderful.
Absolutely. And I mean, it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be bad days either. But again, eventually those bad days become less. And you really do appreciate the good ones even more. And yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely would be it would have been encouraging for me as a 19-year-old to have seen others where I am today, because it didn't exist back then, you know, really. And, you know, as you said, kind of how the community has grown and the awareness of it. It's great to be part of this, because I would have loved to have this type of community and support and testimonials available to me back then, that there just wasn't. And so kind of being able to be involved in it, it's exciting, because again, it's more change that I can make for individuals without actually going and changing them. And so it's the leading by example, and just in showing that example and being honest. And, you know, I try to be very, very truthful and personal at times in my blog and on my social media. And, you know, it may offend some people and it may go far sometimes, but I know if I was that person on the other side, I would want to see that, because it just makes it more real. And so I try to be as real as possible.
And I think that's so important, because I think there are some people out there who give the impression that, you know, they did this one thing and then suddenly they don't have any issues anymore, and, you know, they never have bad days and all of that sort of stuff. And I'd much rather follow somebody who's showing the authentic journey for what it is and the ups and the downs, because that's life. Let's face it, that's life. I'd rather see that than, because that at least gives you a sense of hope, and it sort of validates your experience. Because if you're looking at someone who's got exactly what you've got and they seem to be absolutely 100% fine, then you tend to go, well, what's wrong with me? You know, am I not doing enough? Am I not trying hard enough? Am I not eating? Why can they do it and I can't do it? So I'd much rather people were real about exactly what it's like and what's going on, because I think that's so much more healing and so much more powerful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even just like the tendency that people, like, something that I've seen a lot, and just because the weight sensitivity is a huge thing for me with my diagnosis and condition, the focus oftentimes of it just wanting to be, how much weight have you lost? Or, how has this, changed you in this way? And I often, that's why while I do bring it up at times, I want people to realize there's so much more to that. And so, especially myself, again, having come to the acceptance of myself and how I look, and, realizing that maybe this is what it is, and that's going to be okay. And I want to share that with people, that it is going to be okay if you see, 90% of your other symptoms have really decreased. You're living your life, you're doing these things, and, maybe eventually you will find that other piece. But let's face it, there's so many pieces to the dang puzzle that we'll probably spend our lifetime trying to figure them all out. And if you stress about just the one thing, you'll never get past it.
And it becomes like a blind spot, because you miss all the healing and all the changes that are happening, and you're miserable because you think, oh, but I haven't lost any weight. And that's where people give up, because they didn't get the result that they wanted, but their focus has been in the wrong place. So, yeah, I'm 100% there with you. Particularly, I've had a similar experience to you, being overweight from when I was 9 years old, and going to primary school and being obese and struggling with that all through, my teens and my 20s and my 30s and, into my 40s. It is, and there is a horrible weight bias. There is a horrible weight shaming. People with weight do get discriminated against. People with weight do get treated badly and differently than everybody else. So, as I said, my body is slowly doing whatever it's doing, and I'm fine with that. Whatever weight I end up at, I'm fine with that. I really don't care, as long as I feel good and I can enjoy my life and I can function, and I've got as few symptoms as possible. And I think people have really got to get that through their head, that's where you've got to focus. This is all cosmetic. This is all surface. What you've got to really focus on is, when I wake up in the morning, how do I feel?
Exactly. I mean, both physically and mentally too, I think for me, that last piece was the mental and the acceptance of it. And even before I hit kind of really into the paleo world and lifestyle, I actually had kind of already started the transition on my weight, and realizing, because I remember distinctly frustration, because I had been doing the boot camp for about a year and I'd lost about 5 pounds. Meanwhile, someone joined 6 months in, dropped 50 pounds in 6 months. And I had to kind of step back and say, okay, well, maybe that happened, but what else have I done? I was running, I was working out every day. I was feeling so much better. I physically, my endurance had really grown. I had just, I looked different. I had looked like I had lost weight, even though I hadn't lost the weight. So I had decided, to kind of write down all the other accomplishments that were non-weight related. And there were, 4, 5, 6 times as many things. And I was just like, this is such a dumb way of looking at it. And that was kind of when I started that evolution of thinking differently. And then obviously through paleo and then AAP, I've, completely been able to kind of change it. And yeah, I still get frustrated about my weight at times, but I'm not going to let that rule my healing and stop it and think that I haven't healed just because that piece hasn't changed.
Exactly. Well, Alex, it's been fantastic talking to you, and I really appreciate the time that you've given me. And I know everything that you've had to say today is going to help so many people who needed to hear exactly what you had to say. So thank you so much, and I really look forward to following your journey.
Awesome, and thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful. It's been a good chat.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. And everybody, if you found what Alex had to say useful and you know somebody that this could help, please share this video and pass it on. And I look forward to coming back with the next one in about a month's time. So bye for now.
Bye.